It was an 8-hour drive back home. I'd been visiting my dad for his birthday, but I had to get home. I hadn't been able to get time off work the next day, so it was going to be hell and a half if I didn't get there by morning. The weather wasn't on my side either. What had started as a mild wind had escalated into an incessant howling, rocking my car with gusts of wind that nearly knocked me off course. I could barely hear the radio over the raindrops knocking on my sunroof. And I was 6 hours in when I came across a fallen tree. Another car had stopped ahead and called it in, but I didn't have time to stick around. I took a detour onto a smaller road. It was rural Minnesota. What's the worst that could happen? The road was more pothole than asphalt, but my GPS was still on point. It showed a 20-minute detour, but I figured it would still be quicker than waiting for that tree to be cleared. I rounded a corner and came across a long stretch of road overlooking the countryside. There was a wheat field to the left and a pine forest to the right. It was dark, so I couldn't see anyone up ahead. No lights, so I kept going straight, leaning back into my seat. And all of a sudden, a car. It was parked by the side of the road. I swerved, but I ended up smacking it and cracking taillight. I came to a full stop about 20 feet further down the road. Looking back, I bit my lip. I could keep going and that'd be that. Or I could leave my insurance information. I dug around in my glove compartment and found a slip of paper, tucked it under my jacket and got out. I made my way over to the parked car. It was a dark beige sedan that looked like it had been dug out of the 90s. I didn't want to pry, but I couldn't help but to see something odd. There were at least 3 duffel bags in the back seat. I got my papers out and slipped them under the wipers along with the $20 as an apology. I was walking back to my car when I noticed someone approaching. I noticed a couple of details. They had a dirty shovel flung over their shoulders and were holding another duffel bag. And that made it 4 in total. I had this uneasy feeling I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to. This person had been digging something up in the middle of a rainstorm. I couldn't imagine they wanted someone to see them do it. I got out of the rain and into the driver's seat. I put the keys in and fired up the engine. It made a bit of a huffing noise as if wanting to stall, but it didn't. And then someone knocked on my window. I could have put my foot on the gas, but I didn't. Instead, I turned my head, only to see a stern-looking man in his early 50s. He had a thick mustache and a black baseball cap, a look that made me think of someone trying their best to be forgettable and neutral. He was holding a gun. He made a rolling motion with his hand. "Let's have a short conversation before you go running off, sir," he said. "It'll just be a couple of minutes." I rolled down the window. It was dawning on me just how bad this could get if I wasn't careful. We were alone on a small nondescript road during bad weather, and no one knew I was there. And he didn't look like the type of person who was eager for a rational discussion. "Sorry about the taillight," I said. "Do you mind lowering that pistol there?" He forced a smile. "I would mind, yes." He reached his arm in through the open window and unlocked the door. Opening it, he motioned for me to step out. I looked back at the steering wheel, not sure what to do. Maybe I could get away if I did something sudden. "I wouldn't do that," he said. "It'll get messy." I didn't see anything, I assured him. "I'm just passing through." "I'm sure you didn't. Now step out." Looking down the barrel of a gun, I was inclined to listen. I stepped out. My mouth went dry as my senses heightened. I could feel the blood rush into my head. "I don't know what you think I saw," I said. "It was just a duffel bag and a shovel. I don't even know you." "Just step right this way," he said, pointing me to the side of the road. "I didn't see the license plates. Hell, I can hardly see you. It's raining too much, you know?" "Fair enough." He pointed at something up in the pine woods. "Can you see that?" he asked. I leaned in and looked closely. There was nothing up there, just pine trees and rain. Then I realized what he was doing. He was making me stand still. I didn't have time to turn my head before he fired his gun. Now, a lot of stories would have ended here. That would make sense. Even though I barely knew the guy or what he'd done, he wasn't taking any chances. He shot me point blank in the head. I had no idea what happened next, but I figured out a couple of things. He pushed my car into a lake, and he buried me in a shallow grave just east of that road, in a field right up a hill. Writing it out like this, it seems almost detached. Like it didn't really happen to me, like it happened to someone or something else. But I can't say it any other way. He killed me, and I didn't even understand why. In terms of time, it felt like blinking. One moment there's a flash and a bang, the next I'm inhaling dirt. I almost choked there and then, a first sour breath bitter with the salt of the earth. I flailed around until the air touched my fingertips, and then I dug. I gasped for breath, but all I got was mud and grass. Finally, my face broke the surface. I wheezed, sucking in the night. Only then did I realise that my heart was still beating out of my chest. I was still surprised by the loud sound, the gunshot. The rain had seemingly cleared up, but it was late. I was out in a field, and it was a small glade in the middle of a pine forest, where I was surrounded by these strangely coloured sunflowers. They were probably white, but they looked kind of blue in the moonlight. I just had the clothes on my back. He had taken my phone, my car keys, my smartwatch, everything. He'd buried me alive, I thought, but the strangest thing about it was that right where I'd been lying, there was a cross. It was crude, a couple of broken 2x4s nailed together. It looked more like a plus. But what the hell kind of murderer leaves their victim alive and marks their grave? That's when it hit me. He didn't leave me alive. He'd shot me in the back of the head. I touched my skull back to front, but there was nothing wrong with it. Not even a bruise. Physically, I was perfectly fine, but that just didn't make any sense. What the hell had happened? How could I be okay? I had no idea where to go, so I just picked a direction and hoped for the best. It was dark, but the moonlight helped a little. Looking back at that weird glade, I couldn't help but feel watched, as if those creepy sunflowers were all turning my way. First things first, I was going to get to the police. This man was a menace. I had the time and a clear description in my head. The rest would work itself out. It took me about 20 minutes to make it to a road. The same road where I'd run into him, I figured. Or maybe that's just what all roads look like in rural Minnesota. In 2 hours, only a single car passed me on that road, and they weren't eager to stop for hitchhikers. I could see why the guy had picked this spot. It was the middle of nowhere. That I'd ended up there was just bad luck. Wrong place at the wrong time, apparently. Astronomical odds. I'd been following the road for longer than I cared to admit, when a couple of headlights slowed down behind me. And looking back, I could see a middle-aged woman driving a pickup. "You lost?" she called out. Sort of," I said, turning my pockets inside out. "Robbed." "Are you okay?" she asked. "Not really." "Are you on drugs?" "I wish." She scoffed at me and leaned over, opening the passenger side door. "Get in." My eyes went heavy the moment I sat down. I felt the heat of the car melt in my bones, turning my body into butter. I almost nodded off then and there. "Looks like you've had one hell of a night," she said. "Where are you headed?" The police, I guess. Can you call them?" "I can, but there ain't no one around till morning. Unless it's urgent." "It's kind of urgent." "Look, you're not on fire and no one's hurt. They're not coming out to get you till morning, that's all I'm saying." I wiped some dirt off my face and nodded. Nearest motel then." "Nonsense. You can have my kids' room, just for the night." "Thanks, I appreciate that." Her name was Mary Ann. She worked at a water treatment plant not too far away and was coming home from a night out with her work friends. As a single mother to a now grown kid, she didn't mind lending some empty nest space out to a stranger in need. I feel like between Mary Ann and the man who shot me in the head, I'd managed to find the two kinds of people you might run into in rural Minnesota. I got to borrow a room next to her garage for the night. I took a shower and threw my clothes into the washer. Mary Ann didn't have much food to share, but she did microwave me some leftovers. Lasagna. We talked a bit about what had happened, but I didn't have much to say. It was so hard to describe. I couldn't just babble on about how I'd crawled out of a hole in the ground, so I said I'd been mugged and my car stolen at gunpoint. It was an uneasy sleep. It's like my heart wouldn't settle down no matter how comfortable I was. I kept feeling like I was on the edge of bursting into a sprint, like there was still an immediate danger. It was kind of like I kept hearing the click of the gun, anticipating the painful flash of the bullet burning past the hairs on my neck. The following morning, Mary Ann made breakfast. She was chatty, and making breakfast brought out the people person in her. That road is trouble, but I guess you're not the worst thing we found there. Oh yeah? Yeah. Did you see the, hold on. She wiped her hands on a towel and lent me her phone. She had a social media post up about a dead man. I recognized him. It was the man, the one who shot me. There wasn't a lot to it, a small post talking about how he'd been a couple of weeks from turning 71 and how he'd passed suddenly in his car. There were dozens of posts talking about how much they were going to miss him and how great of a guy he'd been. I figured they hadn't known much about his extracurricular activities. Good people don't shoot other good people in the head. Before I handed her phone back, I noticed something odd. Right there, by the time. The date. 31 days had passed. I almost choked on my orange juice. This was beyond explanation. It didn't make any sense. 31 days. I handed Mary Ann her phone back. I mulled the options over in my head. I wanted to call my mum, but I couldn't remember her number. It was saved on my phone, which was gone. Besides, what would I tell her? Again, you can't just tell people you've crawled out of a hole in the ground. I figured I could do a little research, tried to figure out what had happened before I went to police. Maybe there was a logical explanation for all of this. Maybe I just missed it. And if so, a little research was a small price to pay to not sound insane. Thanks, I said. You know where this guy lived? You know him? She asked. Sort of, I said. An acquaintance. I mean, yeah, I can show you his place if you want. I had to know more. There were too many questions in the air right now, and I had to get a couple of answers before I started to untangle it. If I could figure out why this guy had shot me in the head, maybe I could go to the police with something concrete. How the hell 31 days had passed would have to wait. Mary Ann drove me downtown. I don't remember the name of the town, but it was small. Basically just a collection of houses by the side of a quasi-busy street. It had gone from late autumn to early winter in those 31 days, and it showed. The morning frost was just melting off the sleeping trees. She turned onto a small road just off the main street and up a hill. The house we looked for stood out like a sore thumb. The only white house with red detailing. It looked like a big shed had swallowed a candy cane. Hideous. It was clear that no one had been there in a while. Some kids had broken the windows, a couple of trees in the yard cast long shadows across the bare dirt, accentuating the midwestern morning sun. There was that small town smell in the air, mud, melted frost, diesel. I thanked Mary Ann, and she handed me $50. There's a motel just down the road. Ought to be a couple of rooms there if you need some space. God bless that woman. As she drove away, I walked up to the front door. The lock was broken, and there were a couple of spray tags on the side. The door was barely holding onto the hinges, having been rocked back and forth by harsh winds. The inside was pretty lackluster. The guy was clearly a loner. No pictures on the walls, no pets, barely any decorations. A couple of polite postcards from acquaintances piled up in the hallway. Empty plates on the kitchen table. And checking the fridge, there was half a six-pack and a jar of pickles. That's it. It was empty. If this guy was turning 71, there was no signs of a long life. In fact, there were no signs of anything. You could tell there had been people going through the place. Furniture had been moved and broken. There were scratch marks on the floor from where someone had tried to break the floorboards. There was also some cigarette smoke. Maybe the guy was a chain smoker, but the place didn't smell like it. I wandered around, not really knowing what to look for. I had this feeling that knowing why he had tried to kill me might shed some light on things, but it really didn't. It's like the post said, he just tipped over and died. It was hard to accept that maybe, just maybe, I'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe I'd never know for sure. Still, the guy had it coming. Whatever the reason, you don't just kill people in cold blood. Leaving that house behind, the question remained, why me? What did I do? There was no point in grinding it over and over in my head. I figured I'd get a room at that motel, get in touch with the police and get back on the road. My family had to be worried sick. I felt a little bad for spending this much time running around with this nonsense, but it bothered me to no end. You don't forget waking up in a shallow grave, you just don't. I followed Mary Ann's directions and came across a gravel path. A long, winding path over a hill and through the pine woods. I spotted a peculiar tree in the distance. A dead, leafless oak. I decided to stop there and rest my feet for a bit. It had a root that curled around itself, making an excellent seat. I sat down to ponder my options, but see, I do this thing when I'm deep in thought. I scratch something over and over with my left index finger. There's something about the sensation of running your finger over something textured that just numbs my mind. And so, as I sat there and considered my next move, I did just that. I scratched a bit. Right in that exact spot, something had already scratched the bark off. I pulled my finger back, sticky with sap. Someone had been sitting here just like I was. They'd been scratching that spot just like I'd done. Odd. Following the trail, I ended up next to two buildings down by the main road. And there it was, the motel and a supermarket. And there was a woman outside the motel smoking a cigarette. She kept looking my way, so I waved at her. "You here to pick up your stuff?" she asked. "What?" "Your stuff. I'll throw it away if you don't." "No, yeah, I'll get it, sorry." I had no idea what she was talking about, but she clearly intended to talk to me. There was no mistaking it, she had seen me before. And she was very comfortable in that fact, so much so that it made me question if we had history. I joined her outside the motel and waited for her to finish her cigarette. I got a stern talking to about leaving things behind. Apparently there was only so much space in the lost and found. I apologised, which eased the tension a bit. Maybe she was expecting some kind of entitled big city folk talk from me. She said she'd give me 20 minutes to clear out the room and handed me a key. And so I hurried down the hall and up the stairs. Standing outside that room, I didn't know what to expect. I'd never been there before. I've never seen this woman, and yet she seemed to know me, or at the very least, she'd seen me before. And when I entered, I could tell someone had been living there. There were some clothes and a couple of items scattered across the nightstand. It didn't take long until a chill crawled up my spine. The clothes in that room were my size. There was a toothbrush in a green plastic case in the bathroom, just like I always keep it. I'm a bit squeamish about bacteria, which begged the question, had I been there before? So I decided to do a test. If I had been there before, my phone would be tucked away and hidden near the bed. I'd had some bad experiences with staff stealing my electronics in the past, so I leaned over the bed and fumbled around for a bit. And there it was. I found my phone nuzzled between the wall and the bed. But more than that, I found something hidden underneath. A black metal box with a 4-digit code. I tested the first 4-digit code that came to mind, and voila, it popped open. In it, I found a gun, 6 bullets, a stack of about 40 $100 bills, and a notebook. And there was a knock at the door before I could explore a little further. "You finished?" the lady asked. "Sorry," I said, it's gonna be a while." "You staying?" "Would you mind if I did?" "You paying?" "Of course, yeah." "Alright then." I sat there for a moment, taking it all in. How could I have known it would be there? And how would I know the code? How could I have been in that room without remembering anything about it? It didn't make sense, but I was holding the proof in my hands. There had to be answers. I paid for a couple of days and locked myself in that room. I gathered all the clothes and checked all the corners to make sure there was nothing else hidden in there. It felt strange, like I was following in my own footsteps. But I'd never been there before. I'd woken up in that field like no time had passed. What was I missing? I kept the TV on in the background just to fill the empty space. I checked the phone. There were a couple of outgoing calls. A few of them short, a couple of them a little longer. Some of them were dated from about 10 to 15 days after I was attacked. In the empty space I couldn't account for. Those were 30 days of my life that were just gone. But something had happened in between. There were a couple of texts too. Most of them were just people being worried, asking if I was okay. There were a couple of replies sent from this phone, but just a few. They were short, just saying I'm fine. But one text stood out. It was from my younger sister. "Why are they saying you're dead?" she wrote. And there had been no response. Dead? I immediately tried to call her, but my phone was disconnected. Either the service was discontinued or I hadn't paid my bills. Either way, I wasn't getting through. I decided to check the notebook. The pages were dated, starting at about 21 to 22 days after my supposed death. It mentioned waking up in a field of blue sunflowers, disoriented and looking for help. It mentioned getting a ride to town from an old man in a blue van. Other entries mentioned talking to people about my assailant, only to find out he'd already died. It seems that my first instinct was always to find the guy who killed me, and always finding out that he was gone. These notes spoke about an experience that was almost identical to mine, about waking up, about getting to a motel, about looking up the house of our attacker. Apparently that's where they'd found the gun and the money. Maybe it hadn't been kids messing up the place, maybe it was me. The notes also mentioned a letter left behind. It just said that he was sorry, the note read. There were more notes, dates, connections, so I flipped to an empty page, grabbed a pen, and tried to put it all into a coherent timeline. It seems that about 10 days after getting shot in the head, I'd woken up in a field for the first time. I'd tried to find the man who did it, but he had already died more than a week prior. According to the notebook, the man had died either the same night that I did, or the day after. Then, on day 20, I'd woken up in a field again. I'd make my way back to town to find the man who killed me, but he was already dead. And for the next few days, I'd been locked up in this very motel, trying to figure out what was going on. I'd made numerous calls, sent texts, and a couple of emails, only to be told that I'd been declared dead. Apparently, I'd walked into the police station on day 19 and fell over, dead. Complete organ failure, according to the coroner. The notes warned me about contacting friends and family, telling me I'd just cause harm and confusion. For all they knew, I was gone. Talking to them would open a lot of questions that I couldn't answer. But I wasn't dead. I was right there reading that notebook. And from all I could gather, there seemed to be a pattern. Every 10 days, I would wake up in that field as if nothing had happened. I would believe I'd just gotten killed by that man, and I'd seek to either get help or revenge. But he was already dead. The world had moved on. But the notes didn't speak of me having seen any other versions of myself. So what exactly happened to every version? Did they all drop dead? The final entry hinted at an answer. It simply read, "I can feel my heart slowing down. I haven't been able to relax for over a week, and now it's getting hard to move. I have to pry my fingers open with my teeth. My toes have turned black. I'm seeing things. I see the one before me. I see you reading this. I know what's about to happen, and to prove it, I will put a cross on that spot. It will be the first thing you'll see." The cross. The old man hadn't been the one to put that up. I had. Okay, so this was the working theory. Every 10 days, I would wake up in that field, and every 9 or 10 days after that, I would die, only for a new me to wake up, repeating the cycle. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I turned everything in that notebook in and out, looking for answers. There were a couple of notes about checking the library, talking to people about local legends and mentions of those strange sunflowers, but there were no answers. It was all dead ends and vague nonsense. I didn't know what to do. The first version of me had fumbled around, confused and scared, and died. The second version had tried to figure things out, but was still gone. What the hell could I do that those two didn't? And did this mean I was going to die in about a week? Every idea that I had was in that notebook. It was already there, and it had failed. I'd checked the soil in that glade, I'd talked to the locals, I'd researched similar myths and legends, I'd even tried burying myself in that soil again as if I could go back somehow, but no. I'd been killed and buried among those flowers, and they refused to stop bringing me back, and it did so about every 10 days. I wasted that entire day trying to piece it all together. I fell asleep somewhere around 9 in the evening, still holding that notebook. I kept falling in and out of sleep, having these uneasy thoughts. I kept imagining that first breath as I breached the surface, digging myself out of a shallow grave, the confusion, the ringing in my ears from that gunshot. But there were other things in the dark of my dreams. The sound of my feet rushing into that house, desperately digging through a home, only to find a gun and a letter, scaring off a few kids, making them drop their spray cans as they fled. Then there was the sound of people crying and screaming in my ear, questions I can't answer, desperation on all ends, building into this tight knot in my chest that no comforting word could untangle. Then a lake, aching joints, a final swim as my bones fossilized and decayed. I was at peace, knowing I was about to go, and I chose to do it in a way where no one would be bothered. And now me, here, alone in a motel, trying not to hear the ticking clock, trying not to think of what happens when my 10 days are up. The next day, I sprang into action. I washed a cold sweat off my brow and decided to answer what questions remained in that notebook. I would do anything. There had to be a solution. Things always work out one way or another. Checking recently used apps, I found out that my previous iteration, the second copy, had used a map. They'd searched for nearby lakes. There was that one lake called Frog Lake nearby, and they'd just walked into it. That must have been the way they chose to end things. Out of sight, out of mind. But the biggest questions remained. Why had that old man killed me to begin with? I fell into a vicious cycle of anxiety, desperation, and failure. I tried to find his car, but it had been destroyed. I tried to find any of his relatives, but he had none. All who had posted had either been acquaintances or friends he'd made. I messaged a couple of them using the motel Wi-Fi, but they either didn't respond or had nothing to say. I tried to check for prior convictions, but he had none. I tried to find out something about his gun, but it was unregistered and the serial number had been filed off. I couldn't even find out where he got the bullets. And why had he apologized? Why leave me money? The only thing I could think of were those duffel bags of his and his digging. There had to be a reason. The nights were getting worse. I was seeing little glimpses of things that had been. Crying in the motel room, rushing into the police station, tearing out notes from my notebook and clawing at my face until it bled. Frustration, hopelessness, and desperation. And with every glimpse, every dream, I started to realize how futile this was. Every idea, every thought, everything I tried, I'd already done it. I was just repeating patterns. I was in a race against myself and nothing would change. On day 5, I made my way back out to that glade. Retracing my steps, I found that it was surprisingly close to where he had parked his car that night. Most of the ground there was gravel and rock, but the soil in that glade was soft and malleable. To me, the only thing that made sense was that he'd been digging for something up there. The cross was still up there. I couldn't stop looking at it. What had I thought as I put that up? Did I still have hope? That night, I started seeing other things, not just things that had been, but things that were to come, years from now. Walking in that same glade, the cross long since withered by age. A little bag left by the side, a welcome package. The sunflowers would still be there. The cars would look different, quieter, cleaner. Over time, the roads would deteriorate. The sun would be warmer. I'd draw thousands upon thousands of the same first breath, over and over. I'd ask myself the same questions. I'd try the same things, and I'd come to the same conclusions. I forced myself awake before I went too far. I didn't want to see. I didn't want to know. The clock was ticking. On day 6, I had completely given up. I just lay there in the motel room, watching daytime TV, eating stale chips from the supermarket across the street. I juggled 10-minute naps with bouts of existential panic, feeling my heart race through my chest as my lungs tightened. I could hear it in the back of my mind, that ticking clock. It was almost over. Forever. I tore my hair out. I crawled into a fetal position, laying in the shower until the water turned cold. But whenever I closed my eyes a little too long, I'd hear myself drawing that first breath again and again, coming to the same horrifying realization. And before I knew it, it would be over. And it would be over and over and over and over. And I'd never really know what had happened until it was too late. By the night of day 6, I might as well have just been dead. I just laid there, naked, on the floor, disassociating. I don't want to talk about day 7. It got worse, and I did a lot of things that I wasn't proud of, so I'm just gonna skip ahead to day 8. I took a walk downtown. There was a corner pub where I decided to have lunch. By happenstance, 2 police officers walked in. They were having a discussion and I couldn't help but overhear it. "That doesn't make any sense," one of them said. "How can the guy have his own bones in a duffel bag?" "That's the thing," the other said. "He must have had a twin, they were identical. So, all these years, there have been two of them? And no one knew? It's like some Parent Trap shit, the officer laughed. Can you imagine? Bones. Duffel bag. There was something there. They had to be talking about him. I hurried back to the motel. My killer had been digging the night he killed me. He had left his gun and bullets in a box, telling me he was sorry along with some money. They'd found bones in his duffel bags that were identical to his own. But what if they weren't an identical twin? What if they were a copy of him? Or maybe he was the copy? I bought a shovel of my own and made my way back out to that glade the same day. Checking the soil where I'd been buried, I dug and I dug deep. Maybe there was a reason I'd been buried in a shallow grave. Maybe there was something else further down. I dug until my muscles ached and my lungs burned. I dug all afternoon, in different places, and finally, I found something. About 5 foot deep, there was a body bag. It was covered in chemicals, but the smell was unmistakable. There was a corpse in there. I knew what I'd see before I even opened it. The zipper struggled, but it rolled open, challenging every sensation in my body. It's a strange feeling to hold your own face, to see your own closed eyes, to stroke your own hair in comfort. The little quirks and scars that only you know of. Except for that one thing, a bullet hole. I collapsed to my knees. I'd figured it out. From a stray thought mentioned by a passerby, I figured it out. There was a reason that man had such bare bones home. Why he looked 50, although he was 70. He'd gone through this. He'd been in the cycle before me. Killing me and having me take his place in the ground must have broken the cycle. So there was an end to it. And that's why he apologized. That's the reason he killed a random person by the side of the road. It wouldn't end until someone took his place. If not me, then someone else. So that meant that I had two options. I could go through this nightmare over and over, or I could end it. I could cut those who would come after me out of the equation and spare them the horror I'd felt. I could do that. Now I had options. That night, after I'd washed the dirt from my hands and knees, the dreams were different. I felt myself drawing another first breath, only to wake up under a starless sky, where the sun had gone dim and the moon hung closer than ever. I could hear rumbling earth as towering monolithic beings reached for the horizon sky. I'd see vaguely humanoid shapes roam a desert wasteland, stretching towards the heavens, crying for death. Crying for an end to the cycle, like me. But there would be more first breaths. One where I would wake up in a firestorm, only to burn to death. Ones where I would wake up choking under solid ice. Ones where I would be pulled up by inhumane scavengers, only to be torn apart and eaten, farmed and cultivated like wheat. And the cycle would continue, turning life into a grotesque, broken mirror image of what I'd been told it would be. Lies and hopes made manifest by church, state and peers. This was real life, uncompromising, uncaring, raw. And then, there'd be no air. Then, no soil. There'd be black. An impossible cold would snap across my crystallizing skin. My eyes would be open, but there'd be nothing to see. No sound to hear but the popping of my eardrums. I'd fail to draw that first breath of air once every 10 days. And again, and again. I woke up screaming on the 9th day. I had no choice. I had to break the cycle. Someone had to take my place in that void. I could see why he'd done it, and I would do so myself without hesitation. I grabbed the gun, the bullets, the shovel, and I made my way to the glade. While the old man had just been bones, I had a whole body to take care of. It didn't matter. I could leave it out in the open and it would make no difference. By the time it mattered, I'd be gone and the cycle would be broken. So I waited by the side of the road, just like he had done. My body had been dug up and was ready to be moved. I didn't want to do it in the daylight though, but time was running out. I didn't even care that I was going away, I just had to avoid that thing that were to come. The infinite awakenings that followed. A lot of cars passed me by. Some honked at me, others went out of their way to splash me with water collected in the many potholes. It wasn't until dinner time that a car slowed down to help. A good Samaritan. A pickup truck. Mary Ann. No, I muttered under my breath. Just keep going, not you. But it was getting late. Could I risk waiting for someone else? She rolled down the window on the passenger side, smiling at me. Her radio clicked off. You back here? What kind of trouble are you looking for? I'm fine, I said. You can keep going. Fine? She scoffed. You're right back where you started. Don't tell me you got robbed again. Not this time, no. So why are you here? I had my hand on the gun. There was no one else around. She was leaning forward and I had a clear shot to her head. I just raised my hand, click, and that would be it. It was simple. Would I risk missing this chance just for her to get some more time? In the grand scheme of things, what would it matter? And what if the next copy of me came to the same conclusion? What would stop them from pulling the trigger? It was either me now or me later. And if not her, then someone else. Did it matter who? I wouldn't be around to care. I could barely keep it together. My hand trembled. She leaned over, looking out the passenger side window. Her brow furrowed a little. I could tell she was concerned. Look, I won't pretend to know your business, but I can see you're not doing well. You must have come across something real bad, friend. I get it. But you know what I do when I feel bad? She patted the passenger side of her pickup. I do something nice. It does all the difference in the world. If you can't help yourself, then maybe you can help someone else. Does the heart good, you know? A thought crossed my mind. I hadn't figured this puzzle out if it hadn't been for me just sticking around. It wasn't being smart or strong or suave. It was a stray bit of luck, presented by two cops having a conversation. So maybe it didn't matter if I couldn't see a solution here and now. There could be a solution elsewhere at another time, just I hadn't seen it yet. And maybe I wouldn't see it, but maybe the next me would. Also, by knowing what was to come, who was to say I couldn't stop it? This outcome couldn't be completely predetermined, or else I'd have told myself about it in that notebook. I had to believe there could be a better way, that there could be a solution and a beautiful ending, not just for me, but for everyone. I took my hand off the gun. I just gotta get something, I said. Can you give me a couple of minutes? Sure, she smiled. Don't keep me waiting. I rushed back up to the glade and nailed a note on the cross. The next me would get a welcome package. I followed Mary Ann back to town, but she offered to have me stay in her son's room again. I couldn't decline. I borrowed his computer, and that's why I'm here, writing this down. I need to spell things out in a way another me will understand, and I think this is a way to do it. So if I'm reading this, hello. I'm glad you saw the note. I hope this sheds some light on things. and maybe you can make it better for the next one. My joints are growing stiffer and my heart is slowing down. It's actually sort of pleasant. The worries start to fade. But the cycle will continue. I'll be gone before long and I'll make sure Mary Ann won't find me. I've called the motel telling them I'll be back soon and to keep the room. I have the money for it, at least for a while longer. It is so easy to despair and so easy to forget our view. We can only see so far, and we can only hear so much. What feels like an endless darkness today can be a warming light by the morning. Sometimes, all we have to do is hope, to hold on, to do the best we can, and trust in the way things unfold. We don't even have to be smart about it or strong. Sometimes, we just gotta be at the right place at the right time. I don't know how many hours I have left. It's strange to count for yourself in hours. It's nice not to know for sure. I'm gonna go for a walk and see how far I'll go. So take a deep breath as if it's your first, because you have all the time in the world.